Good evening from Tampa. During the 2008 presidential election, one candidate having vowed to eliminate earmarks utterly, even the good ones. Quote, as president, I'm going to veto every single spending bill that comes across my desk, unquote, that contains them. The other candidate having promised to reform the process to eliminate the unnecessary earmarks, quoting him, when I'm president, I will go line by line to make sure that we are not spending money unwisely. Our fifth story on the countdown, the reform candidate, Barack Obama, now the president, today delivering and with a speech about earmark reform to boot, yet because he also signed a bill into law that had Republican earmarks in it, many of the right now accusing him of going back on a campaign promise, accusing Obama of not fulfilling McCain's campaign promise. The president this afternoon signing into law the $410 billion omnibus spending bill, describing, quote, the funding necessary for the smooth operation of our nation's government. Earlier this morning, hoping to mitigate criticism over the earmarks in the bill by promising changes on future bills, which he will not have inherited.
Finally, if my administration evaluates an earmark and determines that it has no legitimate public purpose, then we will seek to eliminate it, and we'll work with Congress to do so.
Yet of the 35 senators who voted against that spending bill last night, 28 of them had a combined 307 solo earmarks in the legislation. 25 of those 28 are Republicans. The president noted the hypocrisy.
Done right, earmarks have given legislators the opportunity to direct federal money to worthy projects that benefit people in their districts, and that's why I've opposed their outright elimination. And I also find it ironic that some of those who rail most loudly against this bill because of earmarks actually inserted earmarks of their own and will tout them in their own states and their own districts.
Senator McCain today reliving the glory days of the 2008 presidential election, claiming President Obama broke his promise to reform the process by not vetoing the bill. Quote, the president could have resolved this issue in one statement, no more unauthorized pork barrel projects, and pledged to use his veto pen to stop them. This is an opportunity missed. Since even Senator McCain has apparently lost the ability to remember what he promised and what the president promised during the campaign, let me remind him what he missed. The campaign slogan, no earmarks. That was yours, Senator McCain. Then candidate Obama promised reform, and he lived up to that promise. Time now to call in our own political analyst, Richard Wolff. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening, Keith.
Halfway through the first 100 days, the president gets slammed for not upholding one of his opponent's campaign promises. That's weirder than even the campaign was.
Yeah, the Irish have a phrase for that. It's called sod's law. You get blamed for everything that happens, whether you're responsible or not. You know, it is important to recognize where the problem comes from with earmarks. It comes from Congress, so you have to work with Congress to get them to reform Congress. But it's also worth rewinding the tape here. The president, as a candidate, campaigned against wasteful spending. Now, he was vague there. It could have been that he was talking about wasteful government programs that have been in place for many years, and he was also referring to some of these earmarks. That vagueness has allowed his opponents to do what they're doing now, which is to distort what he actually said. But it's up to this administration right now to try and deal with the government spending that doesn't work. We don't know whether they can do that.
On the undertaking that at least the occasional earmark is a worthy public project, if we were in fact dealing with President McCain having vowed to veto any piece of legislation that contained any earmark in it, where would we be in terms of this government right now? Would it have just shut down from lack of money because a Republican president would have felt like he had to fulfill a draconian campaign promise that doesn't seem to have made a lot of sense in practical application?
Yeah, well, government would have ground to a halt. There's no question about that. And does it make sense for a president to pick this fight when the economy is in such a deep hole? You've also got to understand the ideological position that John McCain comes from here. He's picking up things from the small government crowd, and what they pick up may some of it be wasteful. That's true. But a lot of the other things he criticizes are, for instance, genetic research. He seems to find genetic research wasteful and unnecessary and even faintly humorous. We saw Sarah Palin take on the mighty fruit fly during the campaign. And, you know, it's not an ideological debate here. Some of it doesn't work, some of it does. You cannot shut down the whole of government or ruin relations with Congress because you're taking an ideological position, not at this time.
Beyond vetoing legislation, actually there isn't much a president can do about that legislation. Is it really any president's job to reform Congress by himself, especially when in this case it's Mr. McCain's Republican colleagues who've slapped on 40% of this pork?
Well, you've got to try. It's absolutely true. But if you're going to get Congress to do something really meaningful when it comes to the budget and reining in spending, deal with Medicare, deal with Social Security, deal with defense spending, get the big items under control. And yes, you've got to deal with some of these programs because earmarks can tie the hands of good policy. They can also be bad policy just on their own. But, you know, are you going to focus on the micro level? And if you're going to do that, you've got to get people on board. That means members of Congress who are the biggest advocates for this kind of spending.
To some degree, is this not all micro? I mean, $7.7 billion is an amazing amount of money, and that is what the earmarks amount to in the omnibus bill, but that is still less than 2% of the entire bill. Is there some measure of hype to all of this? Are we looking through the wrong end of a telescope or maybe a microscope?
Well, it's bad because it can lead to corruption, and that gets you into the whole lobbying issue, which is very important for John McCain and for many other people, including President Obama. But it is a small amount of money. It's 1% of the overall stimulus package. And frankly, right now, the challenge is to spend government money to help the economy. It could be that good government is one of those cans that are kicked down the road.
MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff. As always, Richard, great thanks. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Keith.